Carl to Sheldon. Carl to Sheldon. Do you copy?
Bazinga! Oh no, not again!
So, 2024 was a year. There are a lot of ups and downs this year for me and a lot of others, just like any year really. But one thing I noticed is that the movies and TV shows of this year were perhaps some of the most polarizing I think I've seen in a long time. For every masterpiece we had like The Penguin, we also got a lot of stinkers like Joker 2, which is, at the time of me writing this, the most reviled comic book movie of all time critically. So today, I wanted to take a look back at 2024 and talk about the media that I personally enjoyed the most from the year that I gotta check out. I will only be covering media that came out during the year of 2024 for this video, and for the most part, I won't be discussing any other media that I've already discussed here on the channel, such as The Wild Robot, Deadpool and Wolverine, Batman Cape Crusader, and things like that. The only exception I'm going to include on this list is Coral the Collector, which I briefly touched upon in my Autism Representation in New Kids Shows video. But I didn't really fully dive into this show and what makes me like it so much as an autistic representation for young children. So for those of you that have been waiting for a full review on Coral the Collector and my full thoughts on it, today is your lucky day. But going back to the start of the year, I want to first discuss a show that took me by surprise with how in-depth it was, that being Shogun, which debuted on FX and on Hulu as well on February 27th, 2024. It's actually based on the 1970 novel of the same name by James Clavell, which had already been adapted before into a series in the 1980s. The show follows John of Blackthorn, an English sailor who ends up shipwrecked in Japan, a land with whose unfamiliar culture ultimately redefines him and his entire philosophy on life. All the while, we get a surprisingly historically accurate take on Japanese bureaucracy and all the internal strife that is going on with that. It is an incredibly gripping drama with some fantastic performances to boot. Literally every single actor here is just giving in their all, and they're completely putting in their A-game into this production. And it makes the drama between all these different bureaucrats feel that much more compelling and realistic too. I feel like shows or movies like this are honestly harder to come by these days. Think like Gladiator back from the year 2000. At the time, that was actually an unprecedented hit, since movies like that had not really been made for quite a while, big, epic historical dramas such as that. The last really big, critically acclaimed film like that had been Ben-Hur, which had come out like 40 years before Gladiator. So it really does not feel very often we get big historical dramas like this anymore, so Shogun is honestly a big breath of fresh air, and it does this in such a distinct, unique way too. The action battle sequences are incredibly well choreographed, and just the internal familial drama is super compelling too. I think one of my personal favorite things about this series just in general is the way it uses time, specifically as a narrative method. Throughout the series, there are various flashbacks that some episodes will start with to give us background to different characters, most notably Toranaga. But as the show progresses, these flashbacks slowly go back further and further in time to some of his earliest battles that he initially won, showing us why he's the kind of person he is today, and really fleshing out his backstory even more. It's absolutely brilliant. If you have not still seen this show, I really cannot recommend it enough. It really does deserve all the accolades it got last year, because it really is that good. Not long after this, in March, we got another incredible show in the form of X-Men 97. Initially, when I saw the trailers and promotional material for this series, I actually didn't have very high hopes for it, since, in all honesty, it seemed like Disney just trying to bank on 90s nostalgia, which is something they've been doing a lot lately. So imagine my surprise when I actually watched the show and was blown away to realize it wasn't a case of Disney just doing this again. It was actually a genuinely well-written, well-thought-out show with real themes and genuine advancement of the characters that it started in the 90s. Imagine that, huh, Disney? Not sure why you guys can't make more stuff like this. All joking aside, X-Men 97 really is fantastic, and if you've seen it, you probably know exactly what I mean. This show takes what made the original animated series so great and updates it for an adult audience, since the kids that grew up with the original animated series in the 90s are now all adults in their 30s. Or generally roughly around there anyway. They're all dealing with much different issues than they did as kids in the 90s, so this show is really smart in the way it updates that for a modern adult audience. Also, one thing that I thought would never happen that the show somehow managed to do was make me like Cyclops. I personally have never liked Scott Summers at all within the X-Men universe. I've always found him a very boring, just extremely dull character. Jean really should be going for Wolverine a lot more. But this show did the impossible and somehow fleshed out this character that I've never really liked and made me like him. Cyclops here has been so much more well fleshed out, and he's become basically the main character of this show now. Instead of just being some boring Ken doll like he is in the movies or in the comics, here he's actually pretty interesting. And his conflicts are much more nuanced and a lot more interesting than just, I want Jean Grey, I hate Wolverine, Wolverine wants Jean Grey. It's a lot more here with Professor X gone and him having to take up the mantle of leader, and him doubting himself and not really being sure if he can live up to that title, whereas other people are also doubting him on the team itself. This leads to some great internal conflicts and drama that doesn't feel quite too trite or rehashed at all. Overall, it's just a really well written show, and I am really excited for season 2. It just can't get here fast enough. Another very critically acclaimed show that happens to be an anime that I caught for the first time this year in preparation for its 3rd season, which just debuted last month actually, is ReZero. ReZero was an anime that was recommended a lot to me as a fan of Steins Gate, but I never really bothered to check out until now, with hearing its 3rd season was coming out and figuring, this seems like a good time to see what this is all about, and I can check out its 3rd season when that debuts too if I like this enough. And needless to say, yes, I really did like this show. I'm someone who doesn't really like isekai anime very much. I've honestly just found them a little tropey oftentimes and not really that interesting. And at least for me, I have not seen a single isekai that offers me that much depth overall. Although admittedly, I have not seen too many isekai, so you probably shouldn't hold my opinion to fact. The only isekai I've really seen are the Suicide Squad isekai and also Rising of Shield Hero, which I very much dislike. With ReZero, however, I found a very different kind of isekai that really drew me in, especially with how shockingly brutal and downright depressing this show oftentimes gets. Like seriously, this show does not shy away from a lot of intense violence and really mature themes, so fair warning if you are triggered by any of that sort of thing. The show essentially follows an unemployed high school boy named Subaru Natsuki, who really is not doing anything that interesting with his life when suddenly he's whisked away to a magical fantasy land, just like how all isekai start. I think what makes this particular isekai really interesting to me though is the personal trauma that Subaru goes through throughout this entire show, much like a character like Okabe from Steins Gate. Subaru is the kind of person that immediately takes his new surroundings as an opportunity to try and warp everything around him to his will, and try to become the hero of this world too, which is something he never thought he could accomplish in the real world. Hence why he immediately jumps on the opportunity to attempt this in an isekai fantasy setting. However, he has quickly shown that this world is a lot more than he realized at first, and he dies a lot, over and over and over again. And he also watches the people he loves die a lot, over and over and over again. Like I said before, this show honestly gets very depressing and very dark a lot of the time. And it really does explore a lot of deeper existential themes in a really interesting way that a lot of other anime just aren't really able to pull off. I don't want to say too much about this particular show, but if you've seen it, you probably know what I mean. But if you haven't, I highly recommend it. I don't want to say too much more about it to avoid spoiling you. I will say, however, I personally think Season 2 is my favorite season out of the entire series, although Season 3 is very good so far, and I'm excited to see all the new episodes of Season 3 once they come out in February. This show really has been a pleasant surprise to me, and it really has piqued my interest with its deep layering to its world and all the incredible lore that this world has to it. A lot of stuff is very well thought out with all the witches and the cults that surround them. It's just brilliant. I love this show a lot. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely need to. It's just really good. This is exactly the kind of thing I look for in anime. Another show that I did see this year that a lot of you have wanted me to do a full review on, which I am now doing in this particular video, is Carl the Collector, of course. Carl the Collector is an animated series on PBS Kids that debuted last fall that stars an autistic raccoon named Carl. This show is aimed at young children around like 3 to 8, I would say. I did talk about this show briefly in my Autistic Kids Cartoons video when it was initially announced, but now that it's been out for a bit, I can actually review it here. I'm gonna do exactly that. Carl, as the show's title implies, is a collector of many things, and he likes to share these things with all of his friends since they're really his hyperfixations. He collects plushies, seashells, comic books, all kinds of things. And for him, this is a way to express his interest to his friends and other people and try to relate to them. Even outside of Carl himself, there's actually a lot of other characters in this show that are also on the spectrum. And the show overall is actually produced by a mix of both neurodivergent people and also neurotypical people that are either advocates, psychologists, or parents of autistic children. This allows the show to have a real perspective on what autism in young children really looks like and be able to showcase that in this show, both for neurodivergent kids to be able to have an example to look at and not feel alone, but also for neurotypical kids to be able to look at the neurodivergent kids and be able to understand them more, and the show really does offer more awareness because of that. One particular moment on the show that I think does this in a really brilliant way is on an episode called The Fall. In this episode, Carl sees his friend Nico fall in the park when they're flying kites, and he's not really sure what he's supposed to do when he sees this. He freezes up, and he's not really sure how to act in that exact moment, which admittedly as an autistic person, I can very much relate to. I've definitely had many moments like this in the past myself. Nico is initially angry at Carl not understanding why he didn't help her up, but eventually after Carl explains himself, she's understanding of him. And this is honestly a really beautiful example of how a neurotypical person can try and understand a neurodivergent person. This show is honestly really brilliant in the way it spreads awareness on all sorts of areas of the spectrum. And especially in today's day and age, it really is the show that a lot of kids need, in my opinion. As an autistic adult, I wish I had this show as a kid. This would be great. And I'm really glad today's kids are getting stuff like this. It really does matter. I really commend PBS Kids for making such a great show like this that spreads awareness in such an accessible way. Another equally brilliant show that I saw this year that also tackles psychology, funnily enough, and mental health, but in a very different way, in a much darker way, obviously, for adults, was The Penguin. I've stated before on this channel, but I am a huge fan of Matt Reeves' The Batman film. I think it is the best comic book film I've seen in a long time, and is a great, really grounded way to tackle the Batman mythos. I was really deeply satisfied with this film when I saw it back in 2022, so as a result, I was really excited for the Penguin TV show to hit HBO Max in 2024. And needless to say, this show did not disappoint at all. For a brief synopsis, this show basically bridges the gap between the Batman 1 and the Batman Part 2 slated to release in 2027. Specifically, it focuses on the Penguin, played by Colin Farrell, like he was in the first movie, and tracks his rise to power to the top of the crime scene in Gotham. I think this show in particular is really a testament to what comic book media can really be when people put their minds to it. The story of Oswald literally manipulating every single person around him for his own personal gain, just to get to the top and feel like he's accomplished something, and also to fulfill his own selfish wish of feeling his mother's acceptance, which he ends up doing by replacing his own mother with a pseudo-mother, is incredibly unsettling, perhaps for how realistic it is and how it often does mirror our own society and how there are people like this that exist out there. There are 100% people out there that exist simply to hang around people high up on the social ladder only to try and take them down and exploit them in order to climb up higher on the social ladder themselves. Oswald is exactly this kind of person. He manipulates Sophia, who is actually one of the only people who sees the social ladder for what it is and tries to call it out, but ends up getting sent to Arkham and ends up imprisoned, which is also very true to life, I feel like, unfortunately. When she calls out her family for what it is, and her dad for being a murderer, she is sent to an insane asylum to try and keep her quiet. Oz also pretty blatantly manipulates Victor, who is a kid he ends up finding trying to carjack him and almost kills him initially, but then decides to let him live for a bit, just so he can use him. But before he kills him, he wants to show him the ways of the mob and get him into the drug trade overall to try and use him for that. This is all to get his hot new drug Bliss out there, which ultimately does propel him to the top of the crime scene in Gotham. He manipulates all the other crime syndicates in Gotham too and plays into their feelings of being trodden over and disrespected at every turn, which is something he also knows pretty well himself. So it's a very easy thing for him to play into and ultimately use for his own personal gain. overall, like I said before, this is really comic book media at its finest and most artistic and intelligent. It's a great piece of mobster media too, very much in the vein of something like The Sopranos, and if you haven't seen The Penguin, what are you doing? Definitely watch this. It was easily one of the best things I saw in 2024. Now with The Penguin out of the way, I want to discuss two other anime I saw this year that I also really liked outside of ReZero, that being Dandadan and Solo Leveling, which I liked for separate reasons. Let's start with Solo Leveling, since it actually plays off The Penguin pretty well with its themes of manipulating society and also trying to get to the top of the social ladder, although in this case, it's not so much a social ladder as it is a hunter ladder. In the world of Solo Leveling, hunters are hired by different groups to go into various dungeons and kill monsters for money. One such person choosing to hunt for money is Jinwoo, who is the main character in this show. He is actually a very weak hunter, but the reason why he's hunting is to be able to support his sister and his mom who is dying. He really needs the money in order to keep her alive. However, after one surprisingly successful hunt where he's able to save an entire group by being their strategist and helping them get through one particular dungeon with a lot of very dangerous monsters, he's left behind by them, and he almost dies. However, he is able to stay alive thanks to a reawakening, as this show calls it, that also allows him to level up a lot more quickly than most other hunters. As a result of this new leveling ability, he quickly reaches the top ranks of hunters and is able to use these abilities for himself and be able to provide for his family. And of course, now seeing that he's a great hunter, people immediately start flocking to him, being like, "Oh, you're so great, Jinwoo! I knew you were a great hunter all along! You're so successful now! Now I care!" Boy, I sure relate to that. As a result, this show is actually really interesting with how it tackles capitalism and stuff like the social ladder, like I discussed earlier, and how people will often try to manipulate other people to try and climb it, similar to The Penguin, although in a different way, admittedly, with a different approach. This show easily could have just been another run-of-the-mill loser male protagonist, ends up getting incredible power, and goes on a huge zero-to-hero spree type of show, but I think this one does stand out pretty well thanks to its unique setup and world, with all the hunters and their classes and stuff explained pretty well, and the way they make money in this world too. And also the ways they will often try to cheat the system. It's actually very good, and I do recommend it. I do see why this is one of the most critically acclaimed anime of 2024. And of course, the other one that people really seem to be going crazy over this year is Dandadan, which I also really liked. Dandadan is essentially the story of a girl whose grandmother is a spirit medium, and she ends up leaving ghosts obviously as a result, since she deals with that pretty much every day thanks to her grandmother. Just by happenstance, she happens to run into a boy who actually believes in aliens but doesn't believe in ghosts. It just so happens this girl doesn't believe in aliens, so they set out to prove each other wrong. And inevitably, in doing so, they end up proving each other both right, since both aliens and spirits seem to exist in this world. Oops. As a result, the boy named Okarun ends up being cursed, and the girl, whose name is Momo, must help him with the help of her spirit medium grandmother. Obviously, this show ends up being very wacky with many of the scenarios that our two young protagonists find themselves in, but it also has a lot of heart to it too, honestly. Especially since both Momo and Okarun have really been outcast their whole life and really been seen as weirdos by most people. So once they find each other, they find something they can relate over. It feels really like a show tailor-made for people like me, with its focus on the weirdos of society and how they really fit in with each other. Also, it probably has some of the coolest animation styles I think I've seen in anime in a long time now. Highly recommend this one. I cannot wait for season 2. The last thing I wanted to discuss in my Media of 2024 video here was actually the third Sonic movie, which I saw when it came out. I actually pre-ordered the fan event tickets for this one because I was really excited to see it, and I got to see it early as a result. Obviously, a lot of other people before me have already talked about this movie at this point, but needless to say, it was very good, and you can tell it was a movie made by fans for fans. With the Sonic movies overall, they really have just been getting better and better each and every time in my opinion, and they've been upping the ante both of the characters they introduce and also just the overall quality of the films and the characterization of the characters in them. Keanu Reeves obviously stole the show as Shadow, Shadow, and honestly, it feels like he really studied Shadow as a character and realized what made him work in the original Sonic Adventure 2 game. A lot of that ended up translating to the film in my opinion. It was really cool to see Keanu definitely did his homework. I feel like in this movie especially, they upped the amount of Sonic references from the other two movies. Sonic 2 had a lot, I remember, but Sonic 3 really ups the ante on these. There were so many moments that me and the other Sonic fans ended up screaming at in theaters. Like obviously the recreation of the moment when Super Sonic and Super Shadow race across each other as in the Sonic Adventure 2 video game, and they recreate that in the movie, which is awesome. Also, obviously everybody lost their minds when they saw Amy in the post-credit scene, and even Metal Sonic before that. I'm really curious to see what they do in the fourth Sonic movie, since it seems like they're taking a Sonic CD approach now with these new characters they're introducing in the post-credit scene here. Regardless, Paramount and Sega clearly get what a good video game movie looks like, so I am 100% down for Sonic 4, although I'm kinda curious how it would work without Eggman there, given the fact he does die at the end of this movie. I'm very curious to see if Jim Carrey will actually come back for Sonic 4 or not. Maybe it was all just a fake out, who knows, anything's possible. But with that, that's basically the gist of the media that I saw in 2024 that I really enjoyed. This was a slightly longer video of mine since I had a lot of different shows and movies I wanted to discuss, so if you made it to the end here, I really appreciate you. Thank you a lot. I'm definitely looking forward to what we do in 2025 here on the channel as well. And I already have a few different video projects planned, like one for Ace Attorney and also one to celebrate 10 years of The Force Awakens and also talk about Disney Star Wars overall and honestly how they butchered most of it. That obviously will be a longer video and more of a retrospective on Disney Star Wars as a whole, so be on the lookout for that when it drops. As for other media coming out this year that I do plan to review, I want to see Dogman from DreamWorks when that comes out in February, because I think that actually looks really good, and I did enjoy the Captain Underpants movie they did a few years back. I thought that was actually really solid. It was definitely very faithful to the books, which I appreciated. I do want to watch the new Fantastic Four movie when that comes out in July, although I have my doubts on whether that's going to be good or not, given Marvel's track record recently under Disney, so we'll see if they're able to do Fantastic Four right this time. Because the other 4 times have not really been good, which really sucks because I love Fantastic Four. The awful 90s movie they did was really bad in my opinion, and I think all the Fox movies suck to varying degrees as well, so I hope they get it right this time, but yeah, I don't know. I have my doubts. We'll see. That same month, I'll also be watching James Gunn's new Superman movie, which I'm actually very excited for, and that comes out my birthday, so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be the reboot for the DCU, so I'm looking forward to see how James Gunn reboots all of that. Especially with the track record left by the previous DCEU. For other animated stuff coming out next year, I'm actually really looking forward to The Bad Guys 2, because I really liked The Bad Guys 1 as another surprisingly good movie from DreamWorks, and I am absolutely looking forward to Zootopia 2, since Zootopia is one of my all-time favorite Disney movies for how smart and just really clever it is, and well written too. Great message in that movie. And the last big thing that I really want to see in 2025 is obviously Tron Ares. It's no secret I am a huge Tron fan. I mean, look at my avatar. There's a reason it looks like this. So I am hoping that Disney will actually bring back Tron in a respectful way with Tron Ares, but I do have my doubts obviously because A, Jared Leto, and B, I have seen no casting so far for Olivia Wilde, Garrett Hedlund, and even Bruce Boxleitner, who played Tron in both movies, which I personally think is a red flag if Tron isn't in a Tron movie. So we'll see if they actually cast them in later or not. I will say, I think the cast overall is actually pretty good, outside of Jared Leto obviously, with Evan Peters and Cameron Monaghan actually being pretty good choices, and Greta Lee too. Obviously Jeff Bridges has been stated to be returning as well, so we'll see how the film uses him, given he's Kevin Flynn, the creator of this world. But overall, those are my personal thoughts on everything that came out in 2024, and things that are yet to come in 2025. I'm looking forward to a great year, and I hope to see y'all for all of it. Thank you all for supporting what I do. This would not be possible without all of you. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, give it a like. If you didn't like it, give it a like anyway. If you want to check out all my socials down below, you can see all those down there. And if you want to join my Discord too, where you can communicate with me and others offline, that should be linked down below. And if you want to check out my letterbox, that is linked down below as well. That's where I review movies, oftentimes movies or shows I won't review here on YouTube. So you can check that out too if you want extra content from me. But for now, I've been Noah the Otter, and I'll see you on the otter side. Bye!